Hi, my name is Jake Vossenkemper, Director of Agronomy and Research here at Liqui-Grow.
Hi, I'm Katie Hess, Director of Sales and Marketing here at Liqui-Grow.
Hi, I'm Ashley Van Horst, Seed and Seed Treatment Manager here at Liqui-Grow.
Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to do an off-the-cuff with Dr. Jake and with Ashley. They're out in the territory. I'm out in the territory. We're hearing a lot of stuff from reps, so we thought we'd like to ask you some questions off the cuff.
I have two sales and marketing gals that are going to team up on me today. I see what's coming.
Well, Ashley's also been at the ICM conference lately, so she's got some up-to-date current information she wants to ask you about. So Ashley, you want to start this off?
Sure. Well, first up, a big topic is sulfur. Jake, give us an update on sulfur.
Yeah, I was recently at the North Central Soil Fertility Conferences, and one thing that I've talked about a lot historically is, elemental sulfur isn't the best sulfur source because it's very, very, very slowly available. Slowly available enough that it just doesn't oxidize enough, which means become sulfate fast enough to meet crop demand, okay? And so one thing that, I always kind of get, I say this and then some people will say, well, it's a slow release source of sulfur. And yeah, technically that's true, but what, researchers kind of across the Corn Belt has found that, even though it's slow release, even by the next growing season, it just isn't providing enough sulfur at any one time to meet the demands of the crop. So what the research concludes is that it's so slow release that it just doesn't meet the demands of the crop, and you need to continuously apply a source of sulfur that's readily available like ATS or AMS. I mean, that's an update. There's a lot we could go into about sulfur, but I would just say that I've been saying for a while elemental sulfur is not the best sulfur source, and that was reinserted in my mind at the recent North Central Soil Fertility Conferences.
Okay, on that sulfur subject, how about we talk about soybeans? Do soybeans need sulfur? When's the best time to apply it?
Yes, soybeans need sulfur. I've also talked about this in quite a lot of detail. The bottom line is you can look at sulfur balances, and if you want greater than 60 bushel soybeans, the sulfur balance would suggest soybeans need sulfur, okay? How much? Probably not more than 10 pounds per acre. That's probably enough. You could apply it in the fall or the spring. It doesn't really matter. And some people would say, wow, you can't apply sulfur in the fall. But I'm telling you, that this was also at the North Central meetings, looking at fall versus spring sulfur. Yes, sulfate can be leached, but the data just doesn't suggest that putting it on the fall is much different than the spring. And I've done fall versus spring experiments for sulfur and corn, and I find about the same yield increase from sulfur, whether it's fall or spring applied. So theoretically, sulfate does leach. But practically speaking, we don't see that in research trials, that there's a big difference between spring and fall. Theoretically, it should leach, but we don't see that.
On the soybean note, soybean cyst nematodes, we just talked about that in another segment. But what about products like Alevo and Sultro versus the Peking genetics?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two questions in a row. So, that's a great question.
That's why he's got doctor in his name and we don't.
So, Peking, to give a little bit of background, and maybe we can link the video to the hour-long talk between Dr. Tilke and myself. That would give you a lot more background on this. But in brief, PI88788 is the gene, resistance gene we've been using for more than 20 years to help control soybean cyst nematode in soybean, okay? However, just like, glyphosate-resistant weeds, just like HPPD-resistant weeds, we're seeing that trait fail. We're seeing that nematodes are building resistance to that trait. So there's a new trait, sort of a new trait on the market called Peking. And Peking has shown to have much lower levels, if not any resistance from soybean cyst nematode. So Peking is a great option if you have really bad soybean cyst nematode pressure, okay? So Ashley's question is, well, what about Alevo and Sultro? We know that Alevo and Sultro both definitely help control SEN, right? But the kind of control we're talking about isn't the same, right? I mean, I'd have to look up some stuff to tell you for certain, but just hypothetically speaking, if Peking's giving you 100% control, Alevo might be giving you 25% control. So definitely helpful, but it's not going to be the silver bullet if you have bad SEN pressure. That answer your question?
Yeah, and at the ICM conference as well, they mentioned rotating Peking with the PI88788 to reduce that resistance in the Peking for as quickly as it came in the
Correct.
PI88.
Yes, and to expand on that a little bit, there's been some modeling work done. There's been some greenhouse work done, and it looks like Peking might only last maybe 5, 6, 7 years. So if you were to grow Peking continuously for 5 to 7 years, we might find ourselves back in the same boat that we're in with PI88788. Mm-hmm. So, given that, it would be a good idea to rotate PI88788 with Peking. So even if you have, really bad SCN pressure, try to resist the temptation of just planting Peking, from now until it's basically burnt up. So that would be the suggestion: is try not to just, plant Peking continuously, rotated with PI88788. And the other thing is, if you really have SCN pressure that's that bad, grow 3, 4, 5 years of corn. That's going to lower the SCN levels a lot.
Then we can really make our rootworm levels go up.
Well, that's the problem. That's the counter.
There's give and take. Yeah.
There's obviously issues with growing continuous corn, but if SCN is a big problem, that's one possible solution.
It is a really good solution. Ashley, I know in the past we've had options for Peking varieties. Mm-hmm. Do we still have some options for Peking varieties today?
We do. We are actually getting a little bit more from Satavo this year than we've seen in years past. Mershman as well has a couple options. I'd say a little bit more limited supply because of all this information, but we do have options.
Great.
Now, Ashley, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
So when it comes to Peking, Peking was a trait that had come out 10 years ago, and at the time, from my understanding, there was some yield drag associated with Peking. So, do we see that today? Are the Peking varieties of today, do they yield equally with PI88788? I mean, what are the reps telling you? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm not anywhere near the doctorate, so just from what I've heard from other people's research, it has not shown the yield drag that it has in the past. So I have heard that as well, but from recent research, it's shown that the Peking does not have as much of a yield drag. So.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to stay on the soybeans, Jake? Because I got a question for you on soybeans.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so when I first started in ag retail, we were on a 2-year spread basis, right?
Yep.
And then 2 years worth of crops. And so we've kind of gone away from that. We could talk about that at another time if anybody has questions on that. But, then we were talking about fertility levels for soybeans. And does it really even matter? They're soybeans. But what are your K levels? What should they be for soybeans to grow those high yields?
So that's a great question, and the answer is it depends. I'll give you an answer, but maybe we should come back to why it depends. So you need to have 160 part per million at minimum of K. It'd be better if you had closer to 175 part per million. And the reason I say that is, when you look at a yield curve related to potassium concentration levels in the soil, there's a lot of variability. Particularly below 160 part per million. And you really can't guarantee you're going to maximize yield until you're north of roughly 175 part per million. So, and the reason it depends is, in a dry year, K moves with, potassium moves with soil moisture. In a dry year, you're just going to need higher concentrations. If you have a root disease like we saw with Phytophthora this year, and the roots are sacrificed, you're going to need probably more than 160 part per million to maximize yield. If you have bad soybean cyst nematode pressure and the roots are not working very efficiently, you're going to need more than 160 part per million. There's also some pretty stark genetic differences. I haven't seen it as much in soybean, but in corn in 2012, at that time I was still working for DuPont Pioneer, and we were evaluating many different genotypes or corn hybrids, and there was just drastic differences in corn's ability to access K. So there's definitely some varietal. I'm sure there's some varietal differences there too. So in other words, one variety might be able to yield well with 130 part per million, but another variety might need 175 part per million. And that's probably why you see a lot of this variation in the yield response curve. So the only way to guarantee you're going to maximize yield and not have yield reductions due to lack of potassium is to make sure you have enough, unfortunately. But that could also tie into what else? Exact strip, Katie.
Oh,
Come
exact
on.
strip. I figured if you knew you were asking the question, you knew the answer.
Gotcha.
What you wanted to talk about.
So, I think it's important to think about, this research is ongoing, but, for corn and probably soybean too, one way to shortcut the system, let's say you only have 130 part per million of K, and it takes about 9 pounds of K to build the soil test 1 part per million. I mean, if you want to
Do the
get to
math there.
175, you're talking about a lot of K and a lot of money. So one way to shortcut that is to ban K, and instead of changing the soil test level by maybe 8 part per million, you could change the soil test level by 25 part per million in a given zone or the area where the roots are. So that's one way to shortcut the system, and I believe that's one reason why I see yield increases with Exact Strip.
And I think when you're saying shortcut the system, correct me if you don't think this, but you're oftentimes picking up that ground. You don't know what the previous tenant or owner has done with that ground. You've got what you've got to work with.
Correct.
And so before you can, while you've got the time to maintain and build your program, in the short run, you can use things like
Correct.
Exact Strips
Absolutely.
to
Correct.
inflate
the soil test concentrations where the roots are. Exactly.
Right.
That's right. So
Right.
obviously there are many situations where, it doesn't make financial sense to build. I don't own the ground. Whatever.
Or
I can't
how
afford
much longer
it.
are you gonna own the ground?
Right. Or how much longer are you going to own
Yeah.
the ground? This is a way to, Exact Strip building the soil test levels in a zone, in the root area zone, is a way to inflate the soil test levels without having to build and maintain.
Well, I like the Exact Strips too because you can cross a lot of acres in a very short amount of time with not much help at all. You don't need a ton of extra help to do this.
Yep.
And our guys are extremely confident and capable of handling that for you today.
Okay, Ashley, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So if I were a farmer and I was going to plant 3 corn varieties, what are the best varieties in our geography in your opinion?
The first one would be DeKalb 11010. It is new this year, but we saw it in plots, and it won just about every plot from 108 to 115 day. It just stuck right there, put it across almost any soil type, and it's going to run. So that one is huge.
Are there any agronomic watchouts that we know of?
Sandy soils.
So
I would
no
say
sandy soils.
No, I would say watch out there. But other than that, that's why place it almost anywhere, and you're probably going to be fine. And give it some nutrients.
It is pretty consistent across
It
a lot of
is.
different soil types, though.
Yeah.
And,
And from
yield
central
environments.
Iowa to eastern Iowa and our whole geography. So
I really like thinking about corn and soybean varieties, but I have so much to think about that I can't focus on it. So I appreciate having you.
anytime.
So do you have 2 more?
I'd say the other one would be Brevant 14H38. That one is 114 day, and it has just blown everything else they have out of the water. It's like the next best thing, and I love it. It looks really good.
Does it have blow-ground worm traits?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, and above. Stands really nice, good stalk, good ear. I mean, it looks really good.
Does it have any watchouts in your opinion?
No, I would say that one could really go anywhere, along with its the 113 K20. That'd be my third. So sorry, I'm a little biased, Brevant, DeKalb. What do you do?
That's okay. You walk a lot of acres, and so we appreciate your opinion here in eastern Iowa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not Minnesota, not Wisconsin.
No, eastern Iowa's my.
That's your bread and butter right now? Great.
Right now.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing your scope expand even more as
Yes.
you're walking more fields this next year.
So what about soybean varieties?
Oh boy, he's just going to keep
he
asking.
is.
3. Top 3.
Top 3 off the cuff. Brevant 252, Zetavo 2921, and Zetavo 3131.
And for folks who don't know what Zetavo is, which brand is that through? Or which vendor,
yeah.
I mean?
Through BASF.
And those are primarily enlist beans, right?
Yes. Primarily Enlist, proprietary genetics.
Great. Jake, back to you. I want to ask you about these amino acid based products or some of the biologicals that we're seeing enter this space. What's good, what's bad, what should we be looking for?
Well, that's a loaded question. I guess let's start with the amino acid thing. So this year I started an experiment, a biological or a non-traditional screening study, I call it. So non-traditional in my book is anything other than a fungicide, insecticide, or herbicide. So if it's not a traditional pesticide, I call it a non-traditional product.
In the ag retail world, we call those HFIs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that could be, it could be amino acids, it could be plant growth regulators, it could be a live bacteria, those types of products. So I started a screening study, a foliar screening study in soybean this year. So I looked at roughly 10 products, I'm trying to remember off the cuff, and about 4 of those were amino acid-based products. Every one of the amino acid-based products generally increased soybean yields in those studies. Everything else, which fit all kinds of categories, generally did not increase yields. I think is what that says is that foliar applied amino acid-based products in general are probably an up-and-coming thing that we need to be looking at. And I certainly am doing that. And I'll be running a smaller study next year focusing in on those 4 or 5 products that looked really successful in 2023.
Okay, Jake, so if I'm a farmer preparing for the 24 crop, and we're thinking about using these amino acid-based products, what should be on the label? Which ones do you like so far? I mean, a lot of farmers only, we often say they have 40 crops. We don't always want to wait to just try everything.
So Katie already knows what I'm going to say. I'm going to say generally these products look good, but I don't have, enough evidence to say.
So wait 3 more years and I'm going, well, I'll just be 3 years older.
So to answer your question, yes, if you're looking at a jug, usually there's some language about amino acids, okay? I would be careful about just using anything that's labeled amino acids. I mean, I'm gonna cut to the chase and say, the amino acid products that generally looked good in 2023, I'm gonna keep looking at them, but the ones that generally look good were Sulfur, B-Sure, and polyamine. So those are all amino acid-based products, and they all have some language around amino acids on the jug. And so one question, I've been talking a lot about amino acid-based products lately, and one question I've been getting is, well, how do they work? Well, the unfortunate part is that it isn't always very descriptive on what exactly amino acids are in the jug. So, unless you tell me specifically what amino acids are in the jug, then I can't really tell you specifically how they're working. With another product that's looked good in the past, Amino 15, I actually know exactly what amino acid was in that jug, and it was a precursor to glutamate. And glutamate's involved in nitrogen cycling, and we're not going to get into the details on why that's important, but I do believe that, that product in general, because I know exactly what amino acid was in it, was increasing yields because of the glutamate. And glutamate can be short in some cases. So I wish I could tell you exactly why all these products are working, but unless they tell me exactly what amino acids are in the jug, I can't say, because there's 21 of them, right?
On the timing for Amino 15, are you thinking? I think you saw some other responses.
So timing. The other interesting thing about that study in general was, with all of these products that I've just referenced, the V4 application timing was slightly better than the R3. Generally speaking, both application timings increased yields, but in every case, the V4 application timing was slightly better. So I think that's another clue that the V4 application timing in soybean is better than R3. At least we can say that.
So for both of you, we just went through a droughty year here in the Quad City area. What did we say, like 11 to 13 inches of rain throughout the growing season? I know we picked up some more here going into harvest and even after, but what did you see this last year from the droughty conditions? What should we be thinking about going into 24 with these drought-like conditions?
Do you want me to start, Ashley, or do you want?
I can start and then you can.
Sure.
You can make it.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So at the ICM conference, I heard that going into spring is going to be another El Nino, which is what we were in this year, which is what causes the drought. So from what I saw is, well, 1, we need rain, but 2, it's not the end. So I wanted to start, Jake, so I can ask you, if it's not the end, what do we do? What if we go into the second year of drought and we still don't have any rain? What's our concern?
So that's a great question. And so last time I looked at the drought monitor, we were just about back to normal in general. Keep in mind that the drought monitor, doesn't take into a quarter of a county by quarter of a county or by a 5-section area. And one thing we know is that there were places, even in eastern Iowa, that were in relatively good shape in general last year, and there were places that are really dry. So just because the drought monitor says in general we're about back to normal, there's still areas where I'm sure the soil isn't full. Okay, so there will definitely be places, we have a lot of winter to go through yet, but if we don't have above average snowfall, there'll be places where the soil isn't full. And so, if you think that your local geography is drier than normal, you want to be thinking about, not doing excessive tillage. We do know that one of the benefits of no-till is that it definitely conserves moisture. And if you don't believe me, you can ask farmers in Kansas because they'll tell you that no-till definitely conserves moisture. If you have a cover crop out there, you definitely want to be thinking about terminating that cover crop as early as possible this spring because they use up water. You definitely want to be thinking about herbicide carryover issues, particularly if you have really low pHs or maybe you're along a gravel road and you have really high pHs. HPPD inhibitors can carry over. Some ALS inhibitors are known to carry over. Couple PPO inhibitors are known to carry over. So, talk to your local Liqui-Grow salesman about exactly what was applied and is that product at risk of carrying over. So those are all things you want to be thinking about. But yeah, definitely try not to do excessive tillage. If you think, especially if you go into spring and you're in a drier area, try to limit spring tillage as much as possible. That helps out a lot more than you think.
And I think, like you were saying, some places were better and some were worse with our rainfall, and people were pleasantly surprised in some areas with how their yields turned out. Is that just due to rain, or is there something else there that we need to thank for that or start looking at?
I think there's a combination of factors. Lots of people, not everybody was pleasantly surprised, but in general, you're right. The theme was yields were better than we thought. I think still down on average across our geography a little bit, but better than we thought. And so, one thing that I think about, and I thought a lot about this fall is, what's the counter to lots of rain? The counter is lots of sunshine, right? And people, just generally you don't think about that. Sunshine's every bit as important as soil moisture, if not more important. So when you have a lack of rainfall, you tend to have plenty of sunshine. So I think that helped out a lot more than folks think. The other thing I would think about is just the timing of the rain events. Yes, we were extremely dry, up until, Katie has this nailed down better than me, but generally we were all very dry until the last part of June, first part of July. And, the timing was so helpful this year. Katie, we talked about this earlier. When does corn need rain? And generally, as long as you get a decent amount of rain prior to tasseling, the crop can turn out pretty dang good.
Yeah, I was surprised. I lived through 2013 in the ag retail world, and that was dry, but this was worse early in the season. And Jake's from Missouri, so he's like, "You ain't seen nothing yet, Katie." And I would call him every day and say, "Geez, Jake, this corn's really going to die. It looks so bad around here." And he'd say, "Man, until it turns white, it's going to be all right." That's like, okay. So I guess he was right on that
You were
one.
so right, Katie. You were on the ledge like every day. I was like, Katie, still got time. And by God, I was right.
He was right.
I know, this Iowa, Illinois farm girl here, I just can't help it. But anyway, I do think that herbicide carryover is something you kind of talked about there briefly, but that is definitely something we really need to be looking at this next spring.
And we have a lot of winter here to go. It'll depend a lot on rainfall, but yeah, keep in the back of your mind, it could be a problem.
And it's warm today, we've got our office doors open, and where we had lunch also had their door open. So I'm thinking about these insects, and I'm thinking, okay, how much winter kill are we getting out of these insects? None.
Yeah. Not to skip that, but I just want to go back to the herbicide carryover thing.
Sure.
So we talked about tillage and, not do tillage in a dry spring. However, a little bit of okay, so the place you're going to see herbicide carryover, it's likely going to be in high pH areas around gravel roads. If you're going to see significant herbicide carryover, that's likely where it's going to be. And so I was on a number of service calls this spring. Every spring I have a number of service calls looking at herbicide injury, but this spring there's one instance that really sticks out in my mind. And there was kind of a low area next to a gate, and the farmer did a bunch of tillage to try to break up compaction around that gate. And, even though it was along the gravel road, there was almost no herbicide injury in that spot. Once you got off the area where we did the tillage, there was a lot of herbicide injury. And that's because, when you did some tillage, you stimulated microbial activity, and these herbicides are often broke down by microbes. So if you think you're at risk of herbicide carryover, do the opposite of what I just said and maybe work the areas around the gravel roads. That definitely could help solve herbicide carryover injuries because you're going to stimulate the microbes. That's going to help break down the herbicides in general.
Okay, now talk about these insects. Winter
Yeah.
carryover.
So there's two insects that come to mind that are really winter survivability is a big deal, and I'm sure there's some I'm missing, but since this is off the cuff, it's stink bugs and soybean. So we know that stink bugs definitely their mortality increases as winter temperatures are harsher. We definitely know that bean leaf beetle and soybean too, their mortality increases as winters are harsher.
Oh, we have a great video on that. We should make sure we link that in here.
Yes, and those two insects in general, nobody ever believes me, but those two insects in general, if you get a yield increase from insecticide, which is pretty common by the way, it's because of those two insects. Those two insects in soybean are much more detrimental than folks realize. They're not easy to see in soybean fields. They're just more harmful than folks realize. So those would be the two insects that I'd be on the watch out for. If we happen to continue to have a mild winter, I would definitely not hesitate using an insecticide with your post-herbicide pass. I mean, I saw a lot of stink bug injury in corn this year, which is not super common. And that's because it was a reasonably mild winter last winter.
And you see that damage in the ear, right?
Yeah, well,
on the kernels.
Yeah, I mean, you can see stink bug injury definitely in kernels, but you can see injury in young seedlings too.
Oh,
for
sure. Okay, Jake. I was recently talking to a farmer probably 2 weeks ago or so, and he said, I just don't see a lot of bang for my buck off of fungicide on soybeans, which made me kind of go, what? But he's not using an insecticide, and I'm okay with that because it's a beneficial thing with IPM. He wasn't hitting any threshold, so he didn't want to just be throwing the insecticide in. But the fungicide piece, I think that's rather interesting. Like, what can he be doing to make sure we're always getting a yield bump off of fungicide?
So there's a couple things that's going to increase your odds of success getting a yield increase from fungicide. Number one, well, most importantly is, do you have a wet July and August, and you don't know that when you apply the fungicide. But after that, timing can be really crucial. So one thing that I have noticed personally is that we're waiting too long, in my opinion. So R3, which you have one pod and one of the upper foremost nodes that's 3/16 of an inch long, that can creep up on you pretty dang quick because 3/16 of an inch long soybean pod isn't very big, right?
Right. And
you're not really noticing until they're 1/4 of an inch long or 1/2 of an inch long,
so
and at that point they're almost at R4, right?
Sure.
And we know from research that R3 timing, pretty sweet spot. You want to be there. So that could be one thing.
Just to stop you there, if you're looking, maybe you should be scouting for R2, because by the time you get home, rinse out your sprayer, get the chemical from wherever you're getting it from at Liqui-Grow.
Then it rains an inch.
Then it rains, and then you have, it's the 4th of July party to go to. So now all of a sudden we're at R4.
Yes.
Very quickly.
That's right. You want to be in front of the game versus behind the game.
So probably shooting for R2.
Yeah, I think if you're shooting for R2, you'll probably get it at R3. That's right. So that's a couple things. Oh yeah, and then we talked of course about using a fungicide with multiple modes of action because there are if you have frog eye leaf spot in the state of Iowa, it's strobilurin resistant because it's coming up from the south where they've been using strobilurin fungicides 2-3 times a year because they have frog eye leaf spot and other soybean diseases that bad. So it's being blown up here, and these isolates we're getting are resistant to strobilurin fungicides. It's also very likely brown spot is strobilurin resistant here in the state of Iowa. So, using a fungicide with multiple modes of action and focusing on the timing would be two things to help ensure that you're going to get, it's going to pay.
And our Liqui-Grow sales reps know that. When I look at the fungicides that they're using today, a lot of them are multiple modes of action.
And we talk about that too.
We do. You're right. Can fungicides knock off the flowers or the pods on soybeans?
No. I know that's talked about a lot, but no. I mean, there are so many, we abort so many flowers.
I thought it was like close to 75% is what we abort for flowers.
Yeah. I actually measured this in my PhD research, and I forget how many it was, but.
Because when we did it in some plot what I would call research. It was like 75%.
Well, I got down in the canopy with a magnifying glass and marked flowers with a marker and came back every 3 days. And
Katie,
so,
was that your research too?
We didn't go to the same college.
But no, the bottom line is, Katie, yes, there are we abort like roughly 60 to 70% of the flowers. So if you knock a few flowers off, whoop-de-doo, because you couldn't fill them all anyway.
Right. But it is about keeping that flower on the plant.
Well, you want to set it, you want to set as many potential flowers as possible. But flower number ain't the problem. It's can you hang on to the flowers that actually do turn into pods? That's the question. That's the real question.
Do these amino acid based products, do those help to hold? Is that some of what they're doing?
Katie, it's so hard for me to say because, like I said, most of these amino acid based products, I don't know what the actual amino acid
If you see Jake in a bean field this next year with a black permanent marker marking, stop and ask him. Any other questions that you have for Jake then?
Well, with the fungicide and corn, we noticed that it helps with just overall plant health. Do we see that in soybeans as well?
I'm going to be hesitant to say that there's a big yield increase due to plant health in soybean. I think there's probably some, but I think the main reason why fungicides are increasing soybean yields has to do with the disease protection. I think that how much does Cycospora leaf spot, which we don't have every year, but how much does that reduce yields? How much does a little bit of brown spot you have every year reduce yields? If you give frog eye leaf spot, that's going to reduce yields a whole bunch. Downy mildew, powdery mildew, I mean, those things all add up. I mean, and they're not in every field and every year, but you'd be surprised, how common those diseases are. They don't tend to devastate yields. So when you get a little 3 bushel, 4 bushel yield increase, there probably wasn't a bunch of disease out there, but there was probably some. And, the other thing, there's some other diseases that we don't commonly think about, like pod and stem blight. Foliar fungicides do have activity on pod and stem blight, but it's not out there when you apply the fungicides, and you may not know if you're going to have it until the combines are rolling, you got black soybeans. So, there's some other diseases that we don't commonly associate, controlling with a fungicide, but they do. White mold is another one, right? I mean, you don't commonly associate being able to get good control of white mold with a fungicide, but, maybe you did get a little bit of control, and maybe that's where a bushel came from. So I don't think there's a magic yield-enhancing property to fungicides, in my personal opinion. It might help some, but I think the main effect is controlling diseases.
So you mentioned when I asked you about the ICM conference, you said they talked about smoke.
Yes.
From the wildfires, that kind of smoke.
Yeah.
So what did you guys learn from the ICM conference on the smoke from the wildfires?
Well, you give us the cliff notes.
It came from Canada and California. Jake is going to give us the...
Is it a problem when we're growing corn and
Yes.
beans?
It can be. And so I've had this question a lot, and I'm happy to say that I've been telling people all along what the summary was. And the summary was, given the timing of the smoke this year, if you recall, we had those really, almost ominously hazy days, basically throughout June, kind of the middle of June. And had that happened during, past R3 and soybean, when we're starting to set pods, had that happened, around BT or after in corn, it probably definitely would have reduced yields. But, the vegetative phases of both corn and soybean really is about building the yield factory, building the leaf area. And generally, you can have some, generally corn and soybean do build enough yield factory, right? And a little bit of stress here and there isn't going to greatly reduce the leaf area, isn't going to greatly reduce the potential of the crop. And that's exactly why we were so dry, and we still had good crops, right? Because we got rain at the right time. So yes, this smoke can be yield limiting, but with the way the timing worked out this year, it probably didn't hurt yields. In fact, if anything, it could be one of those things that may have helped yields a little bit, given the way the year turned out. And that's because, when we had those smoky days, it kept the daytime temperatures down, it kept the evapotranspiration down, and that might have saved a little bit of water. And that might have ended up being a good thing in 2023. Now, if we have that again in 2024 and we have a bunch of smoke during BT or during reproductive growth in corn or soybean, it definitely could reduce yield. So hazy days, smoky days, yes, that can definitely have an effect on the crop, but it's really going to come down to the timing. And that's really what Dan Quinn said from Purdue. And that's kind of what I was telling folks also a month ago or 2 months ago even, is that given the timing of the smoky conditions, I don't think it hurt us that much. And that was Dr. Quinn's opinion as well.
Great cliff notes.
Yeah.
Anything else you have for Jake off the cuff?
One last thing, Jake. We talked about fungicides, but how about insecticides?
Yeah, so for controlling rootworm?
Yes, specifically.
Yes,
I talked with
yes.
Nicole Steckline in another video, and we were talking about the extended diapause, that sort of stuff. So
Yep.
what can we use for insecticides?
Yeah, so, Aztec, Force, your traditional granular insecticides all do a really good job, okay? But one of the negatives are, not a lot of newer planters have the capability to apply those. The second thing is they're pretty dang harmful to you, right? I mean, so they're great products and they work really well on corn rootworm larvae still today. The problem is that they can be harmful to people. And so I bring this up because BASF has a new product out called Nerisma. It has to be applied in furrow. It's a fluid product. But I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe it has a caution symbol on it versus a danger symbol. So not that you want to, take a bath in it or anything at all or get it on you, but if an accident happens, it's going to be much safer for you than those other insecticides that I mentioned. And again, those are great products. I'm not saying they're not. They're really good products. They're very effective. But, the truth is they can be harmful to you.
Is Nerisma something that you can mix in with your starter? I guess I don't know.
You cannot mix it with your starter today. You have to use a separate injection system,
Okay.
but it can be applied in furrow. It has to be applied in furrow. So you cannot mix it with starter today. There's been talk about potentially BASF formulating a version that can be used with starter, but I have no idea where they're at with that or if that's still in the works.
Is it readily available to get your hands on this product, or?
Yeah, I believe so. Based on my understanding, there's no restriction on the amount that we could sell, for example.
Is it
That's my
restricted
understanding.
use?
I do not believe it's restricted use, no.
Well, Jake, what are some key takeaways today off the cuff as we prepare for 2024? In like 30 seconds, not, another whole lead academy.
I would say that, I like starter fertilizer, we talk a lot about exact strip, but I think you can get that same yield increase from the exact strip technology and you wouldn't have to use a starter. So I think more guys would use starter fertilizer. We can talk in furrow, out of furrow, whatever. That's a whole discussion. But in general, I'm just saying that there are places where starter fertilizer definitely pays. I think with the exact strip technology, you're getting that same starter fertilizer boost. So, let's say you're an individual, you're like, yeah, I've wanted to use starter, or I've used starter in the past, but I got a new planter. I just didn't have the tanks on it. I want to go out and buy all the aftermarket tanks. I think you can get that same yield increase you were used to getting from that starter with the exact strip technology. So that's one thing that I want to leave the audience with, that's one reason why I believe we see yield increases with exact strip, is because in some cases, in some conditions, you definitely need a high concentration of nutrients early on in the season.
Okay, Ashley, what about you? What's the last thing you want to tell the folks before 2024 off the cuff?
I think for 2024, just planning. Plan out your hybrids and where you want to put them. Same with your soybean varieties. Plan out the acre they're going to go on. Think about soil types, and then as well as maturities. You don't need to plant all 109-day or all 2.6 beans.
Oh, man. We should have talked more about that, Ashley. That's a great point.
Maybe next time.
What do you want to talk about on
Well,
that, Jake?
I just think, you think about 2023. Had you planted all 3.6 varieties at this latitude, you'd have had great soybean yields because of the late rains, right? Mm-hmm. You would never do that. I mean, 3.6 is a little full for this latitude in general. I'm just saying that spreading out your maturities in both corn and soybean is as important as it ever has been. Make sure you continue to do that. Sometimes I think we get a little too comfortable planting, from a 2.8 to a 3.1 and thinking that's spreading our risk, when the reality is there could be enough overlap between all those varieties. They're really, they're the same thing, basically, right? The other thing that I would think about is, we can plant so rapidly today, and you and I have talked about this. If we have another dry spring like we had this year, just because you can plant your crop in a week doesn't mean that's a great idea, because if you do that, you're going to have all your eggs in one basket. For example, my latest planted plot this year, which was at the end of May, and I'm not proud of that, by the way, but that was my highest yielding location, bar none. And I'm not condoning planting at the end of May either. I'm just saying that by the chance of luck, that was my highest yielding location because it caught the rains. So just because we can plant the crop in a week doesn't mean we always need to.
Is anybody going to ask me what my last off the cuff?
Oh yeah,
Yes,
what's your last
what's
off the cuff?
Well, I was just thinking about, if you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Oh, ring the bell.
Yes.
Give us the light. Right?
Ring the bell, give us the like, thumbs up, share with your friends. And then not only that, but join our Liqui-Grow Loop text chain, where we send out Dr. Jake's weekly updates so that we can keep you informed as to what we're seeing out in your fields. Because, Dr. Jake just can't get from Minnesota all the way to Missouri.
I don't know what more I could have to say after today. But.
I'm sure you've got a whole nother season coming, Jake. So thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoy this Lead Academy series that we've put out together for you.
Lead Academy.
Liqui-Grow
Excellent.
And agronomy
development.